All right, everybody. Welcome to February 2023's Inner Circle webinar. Excited to have you here. I have been trying to update these. I hope you liked the new format that we used last time, which was more of an on-demand version. That's what this one is as well, too. So you can watch at your leisure and make sure that you get the content at the right point in time of your day. So again, for those of you who don't know me or just part of the series, my name is Brandon Moore. I'm a financial planner. Again, our firm is InvestWise Financial. Clients, welcome back. Individuals who have attended workshops in the past, welcome here to learn more. But we got a really fun topic today that I hope to cover and share with you my thoughts and ideas around a common word that we've been hearing called recession, right? What is a recession? How does that affect me? How does that put retirees in a tough spot? Or does it really, depending on what the market, the conditions that we are in? So very excited to talk about that today. And as always, appreciate any comments and feedback from these workshops. If you could send me an email or send my team an email, let us know during your reviews what you want to hear, what you want to see. These are very pertain to my audience that I like to really educate and make sure that you're getting the content you want to see. So again, I appreciate the feedback, one of which was my camera angle. I appreciate that from somebody. Thanks for telling me about that, something I wouldn't have noticed, but hopefully this is a more interactive approach. If you're a client, you've sat in that same chair that this camera is facing, so it might look familiar. So again, let's jump into the content today. So again, how can retirees prosper in a recession? Something that I hear from clients day in and day out, especially the last 6 months of, hey, what is that going to do? How is that going to affect me? What things should I consider? And how can I take advantage of these opportunities here? So let's first talk about what a recession is. And a recession is where there's been technically 2 negative quarters of gross domestic product. We actually technically reached that point in the summer of 2022. A lot of people have said otherwise, right? Because we've had 2 positive quarters of GDP after. And that's something that we have to really kind of decide for ourselves, it seems like these days. But in my personal opinion, I'm in the camp where we've already kind of been in that recessionary environment, but it's been a weird one. I have to agree, because unemployment is super low. And we also have still been growing very, slightly as an economy. Now, the Federal Reserve, if you might have talked about with individuals or maybe heard about maybe on my past webinars, has been rising interest rates to try to slow down the economy. Okay. So that the reason of doing so is to help curb inflation, to make goods and services cheaper for you and I to go out and buy, and to make the businesses that have maybe overborrowed or too leveraged, really slow that down. Okay. And so it's making it more expensive for businesses to do business because these higher interest rates. However, there are some very good advantages to the high interest rates for people in different stages of life. In my opinion, retirees have some of the most out there compared to any other age group. And so I want to make sure you know of some action items there that we can share with you today. And so, the Fed has said time and time again, if you haven't been watching the news or up on the economics, but they want to reach a target of around 2% of inflation. Okay. Right now, as of December of 2022, we were hovering around the 6.5% mark. So there's quite a ways to go. So they're going to probably continue to raise rates up until March, is what the market is predicting. But again, the lagging effects of the interest rates from last year are still have to come into play in the overall economy too. So it's not like what they didn't do before didn't work. It just, things have to play themselves out, and it takes a bit of time to do so. And so with that term recession, what is a recession when that GDP is decreasing, but also how long do they last? What is something realistic that me as an investor, can understand and rely on? Well, the average time of a recession lasts is around 10 months. So if a recession's 10 months, and if technically we started in the summer of 2022, you could say we're about 6 months into this. So with that, time frame of March, with the rate hikes stopping, and depending on how much of a soft landing we can do with this, we might be in store for a potential positive market by the end of the year. But again, remember, the stock market is not the economy, and the economy is not the stock market. And so we're probably going to see that stock market come back before the economy decides to recover. Okay. So keep that in mind, as the stock market is a leading indicator. And we need that stock market exposure to make sure that we're going to beat inflation and stay, participating in the growing global economy. Okay. So that was just a quick synopsis of that recession. Hopefully that kind of helps clarify some of those terms you might have heard throughout the news and anywhere else you might hear it. But let's talk more now about, what retirees can do to take advantage of these market environments. Okay. And I have 5 different things I'm going to cover with you today. And after that, I want to make sure that you have something to take some action on. Okay. Whether it's come and talk to us, come and go and implement it yourself, do something to make sure you're spending the time here with me and implementing what we talk about in a way that you get the proper guidance, in front of you. So the first thing is, with high interest rates comes some abilities for people who are more conservative or have more cash on the sidelines, have the potential to get higher returns than ever before. Okay. Not like this hasn't happened before, but again, a common theme that I hear from people is back in the 90s or especially the 80s, right? You could get some CDs or some bank accounts were paying 9%, right? Well, we're not quite there. However, with the rising interest rates, it's allowed for a lot of banks to pass along those interest savings or interest gains to their clients. Okay. And so there are a couple different types of accounts to consider and look into when you're trying to say, okay, what's my now bucket doing, right? Meaning the bucket that you have for emergency reserves, your planned expenses, and money that you're not using for your longer term growth buckets, right? And so a lot of people are at big banks, including myself, for just the convenience on some of it, but also using some more online banks or accounts that provide some interest. Some of those are called money market accounts. Some of those are called, online savings accounts, where the bank itself or the money market will pass along some interest to you. And some have some FDIC insurance on them, some don't. Some money markets pay higher returns than others. And remember, that's all flexible. It all fluctuates depending on what the rates are. So what I'm trying to summarize here is, if you're a retiree and if you have some safe money or money in a bank in general that's part of your financial plan, right? You can get much higher rates of return on that money than you ever could. Okay. The average, online savings account / money market is paying somewhere between 3 and 4% right now annually. And that's about triple what it was paying in the heat of the pandemic. Okay. So we need to think about this as a plan, right? You're not expecting your cash or money market to ever beat your stock accounts in the long term, right? But if you can get a little bit more juice out of that orange while it's paying that, it's a situation that you want to take advantage of, right? And other types of products and things you might hear from banks are, you've heard of CDs. We actually do some CD ladders for clients as well, or even bond ladders, where, why these types of investments are considered more safe or secure is, they're not, guaranteed by any means, but they allow to be invested in some government-backed securities, right? Like treasury bonds, and other safer investments, right? So that's why we're seeing a lot of people pushing themselves towards some of these investments on that safer money, because again, why not? Okay. And so there's CD ladders, treasury bonds, online savings accounts, money markets, a lot of great things that can be used in that now bucket. Okay. But when we say this, as people always kind of look for those best rates, right? Or the top one that's paying in that specific bank. Don't get caught up in that. You want to make sure you're at a credible bank or credible fund or money market if you're trying to plan for that now bucket solution. Okay. You need to be very confident in where it fits in and not putting too much in that type of account without knowing where it fits in the rest of your plan. Because another mistake that I've seen people do this past year is they've sold out a lot of their stock investments and decided to just go into cash or just rely on these money markets, right? And if you look at those long-term performance, a lot of these money markets, again, we know that they're not going to outperform the stock market, right? It never has happened in history, and it's not going to, more than likely, in the future. And so we can't say that this is the best holding tank forever, but it's great for that immediate bucket, okay? So take a look into that. Know that retirees can take advantage of this more than most, because generally they're going to have some more money in the bank or more in conservative investments that can get some of these. And so make sure that you're educated on that topic. Now, just to note too, the market is up this year, at least as I'm recording this video. It's up quite a bit. And now we're recovering from the last year's market decline. But we do need to consider kind of what will be in store in the next couple of months, right? We're going to see volatility and we're going to see things fluctuating. Now, the other thing, back to a recession where there's higher interest rates sometimes, often higher inflation, but employment is normally a big indicator of how an economy is doing, right? And we're at a point where we have super low unemployment, meaning a lot of people are employed. As much as it might not feel like it, because you always look out there. I've heard why all these places are hiring. Why isn't anybody working? Well, there are a lot of people working, right? But there's just so many jobs that companies are growing and growing that they need more people, right? And they're lacking to find just people in general. Not that people aren't working, but people to fill the positions, right? And so with so much lack of unemployment, this puts a lot of pressure on the economy to get a bit more competitive, right? And where people say, well, I'm worried about a recession, or my retirees say, I'm worried about what's going to happen if there is a continued recession. Well, first off, what are you worried about if you're retired? Okay, at least from the employment side, because you're not out there prospecting for the next big job, right? You're not competing with hundreds of other individuals trying to get that higher salary or those benefits that you need. You, at this point, as you're retired or have a proper plan, you're very well taken care of, right? You have a lot of stability. You have your own health care, and you're living off of the wealth that you've built over the past 30, 40 years of work. So even though it's not nice to hear the word recession, especially from the employment side, where most of that recession is caused, you don't have to worry about that. And one thing that's even better that we've seen commonly in recessionary times is it doesn't mean companies aren't hiring. They're just being smart about who they hire, right? So individuals who are very highly compensated, that's tough for a recessionary hire because it costs a lot of money. Whereas a retiree who maybe is a little bit even bored with their day-to-day, they might want to go get a part-time gig. And those companies are much more open to that idea because there's no benefits involved, and they can generally pay them a lesser than they would somebody who's going to be much more, let's call it resource heavy. And so I see a lot of clients do contract work or just have fun, find some jobs they wanted to do, and they can actually prosper with that. So you have such an advantage, not just with the conservative money that I just talked about in the topic number one, but also the ability to say, hey, if you're really worried about the cost of living, or you want to pull less from your accounts because of where the market's at, and you had a part-time gig in mind, again, no better time for a retiree because of these options. Okay. So consider that as what it is. There's two wins for you right now as a retiree versus someone who is in those working years where they're going to have less savings, more in investments, and of course competing for those jobs. Okay, so two wins for you guys if you are a retired situation. Now, third, let's talk about those buckets. I mentioned before, if you attend my webinars, my seminars, my client meetings, etc., bucket planning is something that we really strive for understanding with clients, right? And this is the proof of the pudding, because if we have all of our assets invested in the same way and we need to rely on them for retirement income, we know that's not going to work, right? Meaning if we know that even if we had everything in the now bucket, well, that's not going to last probably enough throughout your retirement to make sure you can continue to pay yourself the same paycheck you have over the next 30 years with inflation and everything else. And also, on the other contrary, putting everything in the most growth-oriented portfolio itself is also not going to serve you best, because we're worried about the sequence of returns risk, right? When we have to maybe pull out money when the market's down, right? Meaning because you've got to pay yourself a paycheck. That doesn't work as well when we have negative 20% years or negative 10% years and even, right? So we need a proper plan and a strategy to say, you have your now bucket, currently maybe earning 3% or more. You have your soon bucket, the more conservative area of the portfolio that is designed to hedge inflation but not take a lot of risk. And then your later bucket, where's that growth aspect. And what I'll do here, I'm looking at my computer on my left here. I'll do a quick share screen to kind of put the visual concept in your head if you haven't seen it in a while. Okay. So the now, soon, and later. And so if we already know for a fact that you're entering a recession or you're in a recession, the best things we can possibly do is follow the plan, right, is to not sell off our later bucket, keep that for the long term, utilize what we've planned for, especially the now bucket for those planned expenses in that cash. If you're pulling from cash, you don't have to worry about pulling from an account that's down. You actually might be earning a bit of interest based on 0.1 today. And then the soon bucket, that's going to also be generating things like dividends and interest and the ability to still draw from a portfolio without much downside risk. Okay. And so knowing that we don't know how much longer this might last, we can guess, right? But we better not be in a position that we are 100% relying on the stock market to determine how your income is structured. Because if you're pulling out money from that later bucket and the market is down 20%, 10%, 5%, let's say over a 3-year period, keeps going, you're not only pulling out when the market's down with that 5% loss, you're guaranteeing that, but you're also pulling out the taxes as well as the money that you're using for your withdrawal. Okay. So please think about those buckets as a whole. And I just want to make sure I showed you that visual. Okay. And that's why we have those safety nets. Okay. So if you're at the point where you've planned ahead and you're running low on those now or soon buckets, you need to have a conversation. You need to figure out where in your portfolio where to refill, right? Most clients, again, are going to be in an okay spot who've already done the proper planning because we plan for many more years of that. But please talk to somebody, have a conversation, have a plan to know that you're not going to be in a position that is going to affect your livelihood if you decide to continue to withdraw what you're currently withdrawing. Okay. So let's move back into point number 4. Okay. So to summarize, point 1, 2, and 3 was the more conservative money markets, right? Money markets, online savings, treasury bonds, CD ladders, things that make sense in the plan. It's different for everybody. Retirees, you're not looking for a job, so why worry about that recessionary period when there's low, when the job market is scarce, because you're not going to be affected by it. Buckets, if you have the proper buckets, as most people should, as they reach retirement, you're going to be in an okay spot with taking your income even while the market's down, because we're buying ourselves time. And the fourth, inflation. We hear this a lot too. Well, Brandon, my grocery bill is up 20%. Well, mine is too, Mr. and Mrs. Client, probably a little bit more because I don't mind a few extra snacks and goodies, but inflation is high, right? We are going to see increase of goods as we've all felt. But with these different strategies, we're helping ease the pain as much as we can, right? Your best bet to beat inflation is that long-term strategy, leaving that money alone for the later to grow with the market and recover, right? And we know it doesn't feel right always when the market's going down, but as it recovers, we know on average, it's going to beat that average 3% inflation or even average 6% inflation. Okay. And one thing that was given to retirees this past year, actually just about a month ago, was the Social Security cost of living adjustment. The biggest one that we've seen in nearly 30 years was 8.7%. So to put that into context, inflation was around 6.5 at the end of last year. I know clearly it depends on what goods or service you're buying, but however, an over 8% increase, almost 9%, that's a significant chunk of change on your Social Security. And so if your benefit, for example, was $2,500, I just did some quick math here before, just to give you some context, because I'm a numbers person. If your benefit was $2,500 in 2022, and you got that increase for 2023, your benefit would be paying about $2,700 now for 2023. And it's over $200 gain for that period, right? That's over $2,600 a year added to your paycheck, right? That's a lot, right? And so there's things that have been helping retirees be in a better position. And now not everything is out in your control, right? This one clearly wasn't, but that's why we got to use other strategies like 1, 2, 3 that we just talked about to mitigate the others. Okay. Because that's how we're going to successfully get out of this rut, we'll call it, in this economy. But hopefully you're not feeling that way. You shouldn't be in a rut. You should be still confident in your strategy going forward. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is simply just what we do during recessions and what we've been doing, what we've been coaching clients through this year is staying calm, right? Staying calm, staying confident, staying cool and collected, all right? Because this will not last forever. As I mentioned in the beginning, recessions last generally between 8 to 10 months. And if we're in a position where we're already over 6 months through this, on average, right, it could last longer. We're through a big brunt of what we probably would expect, right? In really just a normal market. Okay. Yes, this could be different. Yes, there could be changes, but we're doing those things, right? We're looking at these plans. We're modifying that to make sure that those needs are met by each client, right? And so you don't even often know you're in a recession, kind of like we've been in this past year, until it's almost over. Okay. You'll see the market go down, but again, you'll see the market come back before the economy's back, right? And so what we need to do right now is just focus on exactly what we're doing. Focus on our plan, focus on our asset allocation, making sure we're owning the right investments in our portfolio, trying to understand what's in our portfolio, right? We know there's gonna be changes with maybe bond funds doing better this year than they did last year, or those high interest savings accounts, right? Different options for you to take advantage of. So number 5 is simply just stay calm, right? You're going to be okay. As long as you have a plan in place and as long as you're not making bad decisions with your money during this time, it's part of the process. And the only thing retirees have as a disadvantage, I would say, during a recession is they're often not making any other income to reinvest, right? That's just a different conversation that we have with people who are still working. If you're 5, 10 years out from retirement, oh my gosh, what a gift, right? What a gift to have a market that's on sale that you can buy more while the market's low, and giving yourself that extra boost of wealth and dollars potentially for you to use to retire very comfortably. Okay. So at every stage of the game here, you can't put yourself first off on an island. You're not alone. You're not out there just, floating at sea with nobody else experiencing the same things, right? That's why I can do these presentations, because I know how we all feel, right? Including myself. I don't like to see the accounts go down. I like to see them rise and grow and my clients to feel happy and confident, right? And so whatever we can do, no matter who you are or what your situation is, a plan can improve that, okay? So recession 2023, don't know, right? We never know when the market's going to, call that a thing. But I hope it's a very mild one, and what it sounds like it might be, and it's going to be a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. Okay. But please, I really appreciate the feedback here. I hope this was helpful for everybody attending the call today. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, please give us a call. That's what we're here for. That's what we do. And making sure that you're feeling comfortable in your next best step forward. Okay. On the exit, what thing we're trying here also, if you do have questions, to make it easy, I put my calendar link. So when you exit out of the webinar today, it'll pop over to my calendar link. If you need a time to speak, feel free to book a time. Okay. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time today. And we will see you next month on March's webinar. It's going to be quite interesting and a surprise topic for you that I hope you'll like. All right. Take care. Have a great one. Bye-bye.